Hello, everyone. Welcome. You're here today at the Ballroom F for extension attributes, the what, the why, and the how. Hey, just a quick reminder. Just want to let you know that we are doing Q&A through the JNUC 2023 app. So just heads up, we'll be taking questions through there. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce two of our most talented sales engineers here at Jamf. We have Steve Wood and Lee Kollick to answer the three questions of the what, the why, and how of extension attributes.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
It's a little awkward. Well, afternoon. Chris, thanks for the introduction. Hello, everybody virtual. Hello, everybody here in Austin. We're glad to be here. As Chris said, I'm Steve Wood. I'm a sales engineer here with Jamf. My good friend Lee, who's also a sales engineer with Jamf. Before we get started, want to take a quick straw poll, quick survey. How many people in the room are currently using extension attributes? Good number, most of you, that's awesome. Okay, next question. How many of you would like to use them in your environment or would like to use them more? All right. And finally, last one, who has no idea what an extension attribute is and you have no idea why you're in this room and you're just kind of ducking out, right? Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to start with where you would start any discovery, right? The what. What are extension attributes? Well, extension attributes, let's start with Jamf Pro, right? So Jamf Pro, by default, we all know, Jamf Pro collects a lot of inventory information about our devices. Things like the model of the device, the hard drive storage, the operating system version. But oftentimes there's a lot of things that we want to collect as admins that aren't part of that default inventory information. And so that's really what extension attributes do, right? Extension attributes help Jamf admins to extend the data that's in Jamf Pro to enable various workflows and automations. And that's exactly why they were created. They were created to do that, to extend those. And they're very versatile. There's different types of data that you can grab. You can grab straight text. You can grab numbers. You can grab dates. It's really kind of wide open as to what kind of data you can grab. And you have various different types of extension attributes. You can grab it via a script on Mac OS. You can have an empty text box or string field. You can have a pop-up. And we'll cover a few of those different versions or different types of extension attributes as we go through today. For example, we know, like I said, we know what operating system's running on a device. We probably know what build numbers on a device, but sometimes we want to know what's the highest version of Mac OS that a device can run, right? And that's something we can do with an extension attribute. We'll actually talk about that one in a second. So we're going to tell a little story. We're going to kind of shoulder surf a fellow admin. I want you to meet Jill. Jill is an admin at a small to medium-sized business. She's a Jamf admin. She's, like most of you, she does everything from managing Jamf admin, writing policies, config profiles, to changing the toner in the printer, to helping your users desk side. How many people have changed toner because the users can't figure it out? Right. So just like all of us, she does all of those things. She's also responsible for the life cycle of a device, right? Cradle to grave life of a device. And so Jill uses extension attributes to help her with the reports and the information that her manager wants to see or the procurement department wants to see or security, right? Because security is always wanting to know something about the fleet. Is it secure? Is it compliant? Things like that. So we're going to go along on a journey with Jill, and we're going to talk through a few different areas of the cradle-to-grave lifecycle of a device.
So Steve mentioned the journey we're about to go on. And in any story you're going to tell, you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning of our story starts with the enrollment period. And this is when Jill is at her busiest, deploying new devices into the field and getting those devices into the hands of employees who are really excited to use them. There are a lot of different extension attributes that are relevant during this time, and we'll talk about some of those as we get through the presentation. But the biggest thing I want you to keep in mind right now is that extension attributes are going to give Jill the flexibility she needs to get the data she wants into Jamf Pro and get the relevant information about her devices into Jamf Pro that are most important to her.
There we go. Can't block it.
So the first extension attribute we're going to talk about is a date-based extension attribute. And a date-based extension attribute, as it implies, allows you to plug a date into Jamf Pro, give it a name, and tie that to the computer's record. So the first date that we're going to look at here is the date deployed. Remember, we're at the beginning of the story. We're talking about enrollment. So date deployed is where we're at right now. And Jill's going to use that extension attribute to mark when a device actually gets into the hands of an employee. The nice thing about a date-based extension attribute is Jill has a lot of options to input this into the system. So if she's only deploying 1 or 2 computers, she could do this manually at the computer record. I'm guessing, like most of you though, you're probably deploying and Jill's deploying a lot more devices than just 1 or 2, and if she's doing that, she can automate this process and use an API call to pull this data into the system in a much faster fashion. Ultimately, regardless of how that data gets into the system, Jill has a lot of different options for what she can do with the extension attributes after. She can use these for greater depth within smart groups. She can use this information to give deeper line items and inventory searches, or she can also use this to report off of any extension attributes she's looking at. So as I mentioned before, Jill is purchasing devices in bulk several times throughout the year. And often these situations are that they have available budget or they have a perceived need, and so they're going to start purchasing devices. Very rarely are these devices purchased with a specific employee in mind. And what this leads to is a situation where a bunch of devices are coming in and sitting on the shelves for months at a time. And as Jill was going through this process, she started to realize, hey, we are wasting AppleCare. And this is something that we're spending a lot of money to get and just completely wasting on devices sitting on the shelves. So Jill started to look at this date deployed extension attribute and compare it to things like the date a device was delivered. And it gave her the ability to roll out devices more quickly and most importantly, ensure that the devices that were sitting on the shelf the longest were the first to be deployed. And that really sped up and made things more efficient for her IT team. So another benefit that Jill realized from using this date deployed extension attribute is she could start to track the number of devices that she's deploying on a monthly, quarterly, or even annual basis. And while this information provides a lot of benefits to Jill, it's really beneficial for a lot of different team members, like Jill's manager, for example, as Steve mentioned before. And so Jill decided she was going to create a report based on this date deployed and auto-send this to various team members on a regular cadence. So here's the example of one of those reports, and this report is really going to give Jill the information she needs about when they are deploying devices, when their busiest times of year are for deploying devices, and basically let her know sort of what the cadence is for when these devices are coming in and going out. This is really beneficial for Jill as it lets her plan and forecast accordingly, but it's also really beneficial for Jill's manager, who, when she gets this report, she could see, okay, next quarter, Jill is going to be really busy deploying devices, or we have a crunch period right now, and we want to get Jill some extra help so that she can deploy the devices she needs in an efficient fashion. This sort of report is going to give that information to Jill or her manager so that they can take action accordingly. So now that we have deployed our devices and we have new devices in the hands of employees, Jill can really start to leverage the power of extension attributes. So Jill's company uses Jamf Connect, and their goal in using Jamf Connect is to ensure that only trusted users are accessing corporate machines. Jill is going to use a script-based extension attribute to ensure this is happening. The nice thing about a script-based extension attribute is you could plug the script into Jamf Pro to pull specifically the information from the computer that you're looking for. So in this case, Jill is looking for unmigrated or personal accounts that are not connected to their cloud IDP. Using the script allows her to pull this information in. And the nice thing here is, for those of you who are really comfortable scripting, you can custom create your own scripts to pull the specific information you're looking for. If you are not comfortable scripting, there are a lot of templated options available on Jamf Pro, GitHub, and other online resources that could really help you get your feet wet into using script-based DAs. So here's the output of that script-based extension attribute showing the personal or unmigrated accounts on any of these machines. Prior to, and in this case, you can see there's 3 of those accounts that are not connected to Jill's organization's IDP. So prior to deploying this extension attribute, Jill would have had no idea these existed. Now that she has this extension attribute, she's got this recorded in Jamf Pro, and she could take the action she needs to. So maybe she wants to deploy a remote command to remove these, or simply talk to the employee and let them know, hey, you can't have these accounts on your device, and again, solve this or remediate this problem accordingly.
All right, so we've gotten through the cradle portion of lifecycle, right? We've gotten the devices deployed, they're out in their users' hands, our users are being really productive with them, so we're kind of in that midlife area of a device's life. And there's still extension attributes that we can use, or that Jill can use, to help her during this lifetime of her device. So for example, that macOS compatibility one we talked about, service status, maybe she wants to have a way to keep track of devices that are out for repair or retired, sitting on shelf. Or even if the device is compliant. Remember I said security's always asking us for the compliance information. Well, maybe security wants to know, hey, how many devices have SSH enabled? Or how many devices have remote desktop enabled? And those are things that we can pull through script-based EAs that help us to provide that information to our security teams. So this is another script-based EA. This is that macOS compatibility one that I talked about. This particular script simply looks at a device, runs on the device during inventory, and it will look at the hardware, the hard drive size, how much free space it has, the RAM, things like that, and use the system requirement guidelines that Apple puts out for each version of macOS to then report the highest level of macOS that can run on a device. Can the device run only Catalina, or can it run Sonoma, for example? This information can then be used along with that date deployed or date received extension attribute to make a smart group or a report that shows us devices that are not going to be able to run the latest version of the operating system. This particular smart group would be for the 2024 refresh. It's looking at devices that cannot run Sonoma, cannot run Ventura, because Jill's organization is an N-1 org, and devices that were received or deployed more than 2 years ago, right? So that gives you a great view of, hey, here's how many devices I'm gonna need for 2024 because of those particular things. I mentioned the service status, and I mentioned the pop-up extension attribute. I absolutely love pop-up extension attributes because, as anybody knows, if you've ever been out to a website that's got a pop-up, you can only choose what's in the box, right? You can't type in anything, so you don't have to worry about, did I capitalize it? Did I put a space in it? Did someone write it in British English versus American English? I know exactly what text is gonna be in that pop-up field, which is beautiful because then when I go to make my smart groups or my advanced searches, I know exactly what the words are, right? I can put in exactly that text, and it just makes it much easier. So she's using this one for service status, so things like retired, devices out for repair, things like that. Where Jill uses this information, or where it can help her, especially for devices that are out for repair, is it helps Jill plan her loaner fleet. So if she knows that she's got a bunch of devices out for repair, maybe she needs to leave a few more devices in loaner status so that she can hand them out to people, or she can see a progression of devices that are going out to repair. Maybe we use a battery health one that I mentioned earlier, and she can kind of get an idea of, hey, these devices are having some battery issues. They're probably gonna need to go out for repair, so I should probably make sure that I have enough loaners to cover those devices.
All right, congratulations everybody. We have survived the midlife crisis. Maybe we bought ourselves a new sports car. but we have now reached the late stages of life. And the nice thing about this period is a lot of the extension attributes we've been talking about are still really relevant to the late stages of life. So all those key dates and milestones we were talking about, they're still going to apply now. Steve was just talking about macOS compatibility, and if you're trying to make a decision about whether to repair or replace a device, macOS compatibility is obviously going to be a big factor. There are tons of information in Jamf Pro from the extension attributes we've already talked about that are really relevant to this late stage in life. But let's shift gears a bit. We've already spoken about them, and let's kind of focus on some of the extension attributes specific to the late stages of a device's life cycle. So the first we're going to talk about is another date-based extension attribute. So in this case, we're looking at the retirement date of a device. And when you consider the date retired along with the date deployed, the date serviced, and any other key milestones you're looking for, you can really see the entire life cycle of a device while it's been in your environment. So Steve was talking earlier about that full cradle-to-grave experience. These milestone dates are what's laying that out for you. So this particular device, as you can see here, was retired on July 4th. And again, by knowing that, we're seeing this full and complete life cycle for the device. Keep in mind, though, we are not just doing this for one device in our environment. Jill is running this across her fleet so that she can really get a holistic view of the useful life of a particular device in their environment. Having this information and having these analytics available are going to help Jill in a variety of different ways. She can make better forecasting around their purchases. She could be more accurate in her budgeting. And as I mentioned before, you've got to make decisions about whether to repair or replace these devices, knowing how often they've been serviced, knowing how old they are, knowing how they compare to the other useful life of the devices in your environment is going to help really strengthen those repair or replace decisions. So the last extension attribute we're going to touch on today is an integer-based extension attribute. And again, as the name would imply, this allows Jill to input a number, give it a name, and tie it to a particular device. So Jill's organization allows employees to purchase retired devices once they are no longer needed by the organization. Jill wants to track that sale, and she's going to use an integer-based extension attribute to store the sell price of that particular device. But Jill doesn't need to stop there. We've talked about a whole slew of other extension attributes that could apply to recording things like the sale. So you could use a text-based extension attribute to fill in the buyer name, or maybe a date-based extension attribute to fill in the date this sale happened. Ultimately, these extension attributes are here to record the information that Jill cares most about. And in the case of a sale, it's not just Jill who's involved here, it's also her accounting team, because they need to know how much the device was sold for, who to collect the money from, etc. So Jill can make it really easy for her team by creating a report with these extension attributes information and send that off to them again on a regular basis when they need.
All right, so hopefully we've tickled your fancy. We've sparked an interest in your brain. Maybe you've thought up some workflows that you could implement in your organizations. A couple that might pop out are maybe secure token users. Can't enable File Vault without a secure token user on a device. So if that's the case, if a device doesn't have a secure token user, why would we send a policy or config profile to that device to try to enable File Vault? It's just a bad experience for the user, right? Just constantly loops every time they try to log in. So that's one you could use. That one would also help you identify devices that maybe need to be rebuilt, because the only way to get that secure token user on is, guess what, a rebuild or a refresh of the device. Maybe directory attributes. So you've got your cloud identity provider or your LDAP set up. You've already mapped all your attributes to the built-in values that you have, but there's something else that you need. Maybe you need the country that a user's in and you're not able to grab that elsewhere. You can use an extension attribute to grab that information and pull it in so that you can then use that for scoping of applications or policies or profiles. Maybe it's that compliance EA that we talked about. With Jamf Compliance Editor, you're able to set up your CIS level 1, level 2, your NIST, your DISA-STIG. You're able to build out those baselines and get those uploaded into Jamf Pro which then utilizes extension attributes to help you with that compliance reporting for those baselines. A couple real quick things I also wanted to point out. We mentioned date-based EAs quite a bit in here. One of the beautiful things about date-based EAs is that you can do things like less than X number of days, you can do specific date ranges, things like that. We showed a couple of those things. Also, Lee mentioned that these are all capable of being filled out through the API. So they're very API friendly. So if you have external applications like ServiceNow or some other asset management system that keeps track of those dates, like a source of truth, well, you can have those feed that data into Jamf Pro automatically for you through API calls. So while a lot of it can be manual process of, especially with like a pop-up EA or a date-based EA where you maybe have to go in and fill something out, you absolutely can do this through the API. So don't think that you have to constantly be in the GUI. Oh gosh, I've got 100 devices that I got to update this EA on. Nope, do it through the API. So with that, we are, thank you for being here. All of the examples that we did should be available on that QR code. That is a link out to my GitHub page, along with our contact information if you want to get a hold of us. We are going to have a brain date today at 4 p.m. So for you virtual, we're sorry that you're not going to be able to participate, but you can reach out to either one of us. We'll be happy to answer your questions. And with that, I believe we're ready for some QA. Chris.
You got it. All right, our first question is there a way to create an extension attribute that would allow Jamf admins to capture AppleCare warranty information to be able to pull a report on the age of machines, especially now that Apple has added a CAPTCHA limit to limit the amount of requests?
I do not believe there is a way to do that simply because there's no way to grab that data out of, to grab specific warranty information out of Apple's database. The GSX integration is your best option for that. So integrate with GSX if you haven't already, and that will pull a lot of that purchase date information in from Apple.
Awesome. All right, next question. We have too many extension attributes, some that collect a large amount of data into the extension attribute. How can we reduce the amount of extension attributes, or should we populate data into fewer extension attributes to reduce the amount we have?
So that's a tough one, right? So a lot of that depends on your workflows and what you're using the EA data for. I've taken over Jamf instances before as a Jamf admin, and there have been, 100 different extension attributes. And you start going through them and going, what are they doing with this, and why was this created? And there's like duplication and things like that. So I would just suggest kind of auditing the extension attributes, looking at your workflows, understanding what those are being used for, and if you can eliminate them, eliminate them. I would also suggest try not to get too crazy, especially on macOS, try not to get too crazy with script-based EAs that are doing too much, because the collection of that information happens during an inventory. So sometimes you may see that a device, it's less common now with Apple Silicon. So I'm an old hat. I've been doing this for a very, 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 very long time. And back in the day, you would see recons take forever because extension attributes were too much or were doing too many things, and it would actually slow the machine down. You'd see performance hits on the machine. With Apple Silicon, you don't see it as much, but it's still, try not to get too crazy. I've seen workflows where the extension attribute will identify an issue and actually remediate the issue all in the same extension attribute. So,
one thing I'd add to that as well, if you are having an issue in Jamf Pro and something's not acting the way you'd like it to, if you have an extension attribute that's doing a whole bunch of different things, that becomes much more difficult to troubleshoot. So if you simplify your extension attributes and you're just pulling specific information, it's going to be a lot easier to figure out where you're getting tripped up or where you're having an issue if you're having one.
Awesome, thank you. All right, the next one that I have was answered by a couple of folks in there, but wanted your take as well. How can you populate the deployment/retirement date in bulk? One suggestion from the community was the MUT. What other options would you suggest for folks?
Yeah, MUT, API, or writing your own script that can read a CSV file with serial numbers. Those are a couple ways. Postman is another one. If you've never looked at Postman, Highly recommend it. Shameless plug, I actually have a series of blog posts on how to use Postman, how to set it up to do Jamf Pro type stuff, including things like using runners within Postman, where you can feed it a CSV file and it will just loop through that CSV file and do calls. I will place a link on that QR code on that GitHub, but it's geekygordo.com. I know, crazy. But if you look for Gordo and Postman in Google, you'll probably find it. And actually, there's probably a post on Jamf Nation also.
For those of you who have worked in Jamf in a long time, you probably already know the Gordo screen name and have found numerous useful information from Steve in the past.
Awesome. And another question, is there any repository of commonly used extension attributes for the Jamf community?
What was that question?
Is there a repository of commonly used extension attributes for the Jamf community?
So you have a couple options there. In Jamf Pro, you've got templated extension attributes that are available for you. The extension attribute that I was showing earlier, the script-based EA for pulling on migrated accounts, that came directly off Jamf Pro's templates. Additionally, if you look on GitHub or various other options online, you can see all sorts of different scripts that are there and available to be used. I am not particularly comfortable scripting. I can kind of tweak other people's scripts, but writing my own is not something I've ever been great at. But I can find what I need online and tweak that to what I'm looking for and make that script work in my environment. So it's something, the resources are there, it's just looking for them.
Yeah, two great resources. Jamf Nation and the Mac Admin Slack are huge, but also do a Google search for GitHub extension attributes. A lot of the old timers that have been in the community for a while have just huge extension attribute repos out on their GitHub repo. Rich Troughton has quite a few out on his. I think I might actually still have a few out on mine. So.
Perfect. All right. Another question is, for the retirement date in your example, are you creating this based on an organization's predetermined life cycle or using info from other EAs to produce a retirement date?
So in the example we showed here, first off, you could use any of those options that apply best to your environment. Pretty much everything we shared here is sort of a baseline for how you could do something, but tweak any of this to work best for how it works for you. The example we showed here was specific to that device. It was retired on July 4th. It was not a generalization. It was not an estimate. That specific device was retired July 4th, and that's where that information came from. What I was referring to in terms of analysis or data from other devices, you're gonna be collecting this data across all of your fleet, which would then tell you, hey, the average length a device lasts in our environment is 5 years, 7 years, 4 years, whatever that number may be. Having that data lets you analyze it and act accordingly.
All right, and the last question that I have here, unless some more come in, is going to be, how many extension attributes are generally recommended before Jamf Pro starts to have performance issues?
I don't know that there's a baseline recommendation. Like I said, I've seen Jamf Pro servers with 100 to 200 extension attributes. A lot of it's really going to depend on how many of those are like script-based, right? If you had 200 script-based EAs running on Mac OS, that might be a bit of a problem. But if you've got a bunch of text-based, integer-based, things that aren't requiring a lot of compute power, you're probably okay. So there's not really a don't go over 100 type thing. It's really dependent on the Jamf Pro server itself.
One thing I'd echo back to what Steve was saying before with this, audit your extension attributes. Take a look at what you're doing, have a reason behind what you're creating, and ultimately take a look every once in a while to see if what you're using still applies to your environment today. This is just good housekeeping, and I'd say the same thing across your policies, your configuration profiles. You want to make sure what's in your environment is still relevant and doing what you want it to do, and the more often you do that, the more streamlined your environment will be.
Awesome. Well, that ends all the questions that we have here on our iPad. Yeah, how would you like to proceed here?
Awesome. Well, if that's it, we are glad you guys were here. Enjoy the rest of JNUC, and we'll see you again next year.
Thanks, everybody.